Today I'll be showing you how to make the best beef stew ever made in a Puerto Rican style. But first, let's start with the ingredients that we're going to need. First, what we have here is 2.5 pounds of a chuck roast. This is the perfect cut of meat because of all the fat that will help with the flavor and tenderness of the beef. To season the beef stew, we need 1 tablespoon of salt, half a teaspoon of onion and garlic powder, 1.5 teaspoons of sazon, 2 tablespoons of sofrito, and 2 tablespoons of tomato sauce. We also need 3 bay leaves, half a pound of carrots, 1 pound of potatoes, 7 ounces of beer, 8 cups of water, half a cup of vinegar, and 1/4 cup of oil. The first thing you'll notice when you buy a piece of chuck roast is the big fat layer that it has. While most of the fat in between the meat is good, this part specifically doesn't melt away nicely like the other fat between the meat does. You can separate the meat right where the layer of fat is with your hands, or you can always use a knife. Then we want to cut the beef into 1 to 1.5 inch thick cubes. You could cut a little smaller if you like, just don't cut it too big because it will take longer to cook and get tender. While we cut the meat, we want to remove any large chunks of fat we see. I don't want to remove all the fat because the little pieces will melt away while cooking. But you could skip all of this process by buying pre-cut beef stew meat. But I really think buying the chuck roast is better because it is always more tender, at least in my opinion. Now, after removing the fat and cutting the 2.5 pounds of beef, you'll be left with about 2 pounds of meat. Now we prep the veggies. First, we peel the potatoes. Peeling the potato is just a preference because you could just cut them with the skin on. If you notice here, I never peel them perfectly. I always leave the spots I miss. Cut your potato into about half to 1 inch pieces. Then we want to peel the carrots and cut them. Now for the carrots, what I like to do is cut them diagonally to about 1/4 of an inch thick. The shape is really not that important as the size because we want them to be on the thin side so they could get very tender. Also, this is a rough chop, no need to be precise. Then we take a large pot and add your oil over high heat. I'm using vegetable oil, but achote seed oil is also used in this recipe. Here I'm using a 5 quarts Dutch oven. You could use any pot, just make sure it's big enough for the meat, vegetables, and liquid. Once your oil is hot, we add the meat. What we want to do here is sear the meat. This will do 2 things. It will add texture to your meat and it will leave caramelized bits on the bottom of the pan that will add flavor to the broth of the beef stew. You can skip this step, but it really helps to build flavor. Then add the salt and check to see if the meat is ready or if it needs more time. Here you can see how your meat should look. This step usually takes about 6 minutes. Not all of it will have the same sear, and that's okay. Just keep cooking until most of it has a nice sear. Make sure to flip the meat a couple of times to make sure it doesn't burn. Flipping also helps to melt the extra fat that the meat has. By the time we finish searing the meat, it should all look cooked but not raw. Then we're going to add the sofrito and tomato sauce. The sofrito is one of the most important ingredients and it's the one that makes this beef stew a Puerto Rican recipe. The sofrito is a blend of classic vegetables used in Puerto Rican cooking. It has garlic, onion, culantro, and a mix of different types of peppers. Once you add your sofrito, your kitchen will start filling with the smell of all of those aromatic vegetables. As for the tomato sauce, you can substitute it for tomato paste. Just use half of what is indicated in the recipe. Then we want to add the beer and cook for 6 minutes. Here I'm using a 7-ounce bottle of Corona. This is not a sponsor, this is just what I like to use. In reality, you can use whatever beer you prefer. While you can make this without a beer, in fact most Puerto Rican beef stew recipes are made without it, but trust me on this one, it makes the difference. Now we add the bay leaves, half of the potatoes, half of the carrot, and half of the water. Then we're going to cook this for 30 minutes with the lids on. Now for the veggies, I use the classic potato and carrot mix, but you can add other vegetables like calabaza, which is pumpkin. You can add peas, corn, or my favorite, a can of pink beans. The beans are super delicious because they'll cook, absorbing all of that flavorful broth. Make sure you stir before covering to release all of those caramelized bits that were at the bottom of the pan after searing the meat. And also stir a couple of times while the meat cooks for the 30 minutes to make sure nothing sticks to the bottom of the pan. Now after the 30 minutes have passed, we want to add our last ingredients. We add the garlic and onion powder, we add the sazon, the rest of the vegetables, the vinegar, and the water. The seasonings, I like to add them last because the flavor will be more concentrated because we'll have less liquid. Now, as far for the vegetables, the reason why I only add about half of the vegetables at the beginning is because part of those vegetables will disintegrate and it helps to thicken the broth of the beef stew. Now we cover the beef stew and leave a little gap so water can evaporate and will also help to thicken the broth. Lower your heat to medium-high and cook for the last 30 minutes. Stir a couple of times and make sure nothing sticks to the bottom. After your last 30 minutes have passed, you want to stir everything around and test to see the tenderness of your veggies and your meat. It is also a great time to taste your broth to see if you like to add anything. As you see here, the veggies will be super tender. So if you want to add vegetables that cook fast, let's say corn, then you'll want to add them in the second batch of vegetables because it doesn't need to cook for an hour. If you want your broth to thicken a little bit more, you could cook uncover for a little longer until you reach your desired consistency. But trust me that you want that broth. 1 is to keep your meat moist, and 2 is so you could pour all over your sides. This is usually served with white rice, and then you pour all of that broth on top, and it's so good. It is truly one of the best recipes to make on a weekday and also to feed a large crowd. Remember, you can find the recipe in the description below. Buen provecho. Thanks for watching.